detached from the diagnosis. And I said to the doctor, your one statement has radically changed our lives for the rest of our lives, and it appears that you couldn't care less.
So that diagnosis of dementia of the Alzheimer's type is actually a diagnosis. It is the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. It's
Yes.
as close as we get.
Right.
So what you knew at that point was that this is a progressive terminal condition.
Yes.
And you were at this point probably a couple of years into it, because we generally find we don't start noticing, or the individual is adjusting without anyone knowing for a while before.
People can actually start developing symptoms up to 5 years before it's even displayed. So it was well entrenched at this point. So this was probably around 2004, I guess, 5, when she was diagnosed. So one of the reasons we returned to Massachusetts is her mother lived here, and she had 4 children from a previous marriage who all lived in Franklin County. And I turned to the kids and said, Mom has Alzheimer's, we need to work together. And for whatever the reasons, I couldn't count on them at all. They were just unable to step forward. And it all kind of fell on my shoulders. And I initially was not doing well with this whatsoever. I was really struggling to keep from falling apart. Over time, I ended up developing depression as well, which is about 75% of Alzheimer's caregivers do develop depression, and understandably. So while this is going on, Jeannie was developing a lot of paranoia. She was accusing me of stealing money from her. She accused me of hiding her purse, taking her purse away. And we searched the house for weeks, and then finally one day I was emptying out a clothes hamper and found halfway down her purse. I said, look, Jeannie, here's your purse. And she started yelling at me, why would I hide it? Why would I do such a thing? So we dealt with a lot of that. She had a brace for her leg that kept her from falling, pretty much. And one day I come home and I said, Jeannie, you don't have your brace on. She said, oh, the doctor called and he said, I no longer need to wear my brace, so I threw it away. So I started searching the house, and in a few days I found the brace hidden in the closet under a pile of clothes. And I came out with the brace. I said, hey, Jeannie, some wonderful news. I talked to the doctor. He called today, says, on second thought, you should wear the brace again. And I have it, and let's put it back on again. And so she had her brace.
So she had sometimes, Mo, when she was paranoid and maybe thinking that you were hiding things, but overall, was her relationship with you pretty trusting, and you know, she was aware of her losses?
She was grasping some of that. This is truly a case where the love that we had sort of was more intact than her paranoia. She grew to trust me implicitly. She knew that I was a good guy, I was out to help her, and that it was okay to listen to what I had to say.
So that's also something that's pretty common in early stage. It might be that the individuals misplaced something themselves. They don't know that they did. They can't remember. They think someone else has done it. Maybe someone else has come into the house. That's common reporting that someone else has been there. So how did you do in terms of taking that personally, being accused of that?
One of the lessons that I've learned, and I've got a whole list of lessons I'll share with y'all, is the fact that I have to separate my wife from the illness and realize that when this behavior happens, it's not Jeannie, it's her Alzheimer's that was doing that. And it was tough. It was very, very tough, because I've never been questioned. We've had a wonderful trust in our relationship. There was never a time where we would doubt or question the other one. We were just that open with each other. So this was tough.
So also, let me just ask a couple of other questions. Where was she at this point, or where were you in terms of assisting her with other activities of daily living? She was independent in terms of dressing and bathing, and she was home alone. She could get a meal for herself, those kinds of things?
Well, she didn't cook, so we had arranged for Meals on Wheels. She was having difficulty picking out clothes, so I'd usually pull out 2 outfits and lay them on the bed and give her a choice of which of those 2 to wear. If left to her, she'd wear the same outfit all week, so I'd just, when she'd take them off, I'd just put them in the laundry hamper. She could only bathe if I assisted her in and out of the tub. She was getting very forgetful as far as if she had taken her medications or not. So I developed a system so that they were right there for her. So either she emptied the little dish or she didn't. So we were able to take care of that. She remained more independent. She was always a very independent person, so she was able to maintain quite a bit of that. So that year we had Christmas coming up. And I started noticing all these packages coming to the house, package after package after package. And my wife ended up spending $3,000 that Christmas for her 5 kids and their children. And she was still fully capable of going through catalogs, calling up the order, giving them her credit card number. She had no way of keeping track of what she bought for whom. And subsequently, people were getting 4 or 5 gifts at a time. Once I realized what was going on, I tore up the credit card. I would catch the UPS driver in the driveway saying, no, no, take it back. Those things that I could return, I did. And then I just made a list for her of, here's what you got this one, here's what you got that one, so she could have that in every room of the house so that she knew that they were all taken care of.
And she could still enjoy the catalogs and the selecting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's more trying to keep her empowered. Another thing that happened, sort of funny, but she loved the TV show Walker, Texas Ranger. She just thought it was the best show on earth. And if you're not aware of the show, it's Chuck Norris, who's a karate or judo guy, who is a police officer, and he beats up bad guys every show. And one day she calls me in, she's urgent. She says, Mo, come here quickly, you gotta help me. She says, there's 2 men fighting in the room. And they go running in the room, and on television, Chuck Norris is fighting with some bad guy. And she could no longer discern what was on television and what was happening in the house. So at that point, we no longer watched Chuck Norris. We started watching 1950s and 1960s musicals and comedies and documentaries, travelogues, but nothing with any kind of plot, certainly nothing with any violence in it. That was no longer an option for my wife.
So the negativity, any kind of show or movie or anything that's unsettling or negative, they might not remember what the storyline is, but they're definitely sensing the negative content.
Yep, yep.
And she didn't miss it, she didn't know, she didn't notice?
She never mentioned it again, yeah. So at this point, I realized that what I'm experiencing, I cannot do by myself. I need some sort of support. I attempted going to support groups both in Shelburne Falls and then down in Northampton. And quite honestly, I could not attend these meetings for too long because honestly, Sue, I did not want to know what the end of the story was. And there were people there whose family members had end stages, people that were in nursing homes and no longer recognized their loved ones. And I didn't want to hear about that. I knew that we were going to get to it soon enough, and I didn't need to have that burning a hole in the back of my mind.
It wasn't helpful to you?
Not whatsoever. I did end up doing one-on-one counseling. And I strongly urge anyone out there who's going through this, don't try to do this by yourself. You need to get some sort of support. Just knowing that there's others out there who are going through what you're going through is huge. Or finding a counselor that you're able to talk these things through. But do not attempt to do this on your own. No one's shoulders are that big. Okay? Some more interesting things that happen. There's something called sundowning that occurs with Alzheimer, with some Alzheimer's patients, where usually around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, their behavior changes. In Jeannie's case, very abruptly. It's almost like a little on-off switch was triggered. And she would become very aggressive, very angry, very difficult to work with. She would become threatening. I mean, it was really a very remarkable change. What happened one night, she just sat up in the middle of the night and turns to me, she says, we can't stay here, this is not our house. I said, well, of course it's our house. Our wedding vows are over the bed, the walls are lined with photographs of the family, and I was trying to explain to her logically that this is our house, and that's the night I realized that logic no longer works for someone with Alzheimer's. Out of sheer desperation, I ended up putting on her coat and my coat, and we ended up going for a ride. We left the house that we were in, and as we drove around for a little bit, and as we're pulling back in the driveway, I said, oh, it's so nice to be back home again, and she agreed. And that behavior continued for several weeks. And it got to the point that when I saw it about to begin, I'd just say, you know what, this isn't our house, we need to go and come back to our own home, and thank God it worked every time.
So let's just talk a little bit more about this sundowning business and also about the logic.
Yeah.
So in some cases, it is beneficial to use logic. I mean, there must have been some situations where you could explain and it worked, and other times when explaining clearly didn't work.
Yeah.
So the thing that you look for is the person's response to that.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that logic doesn't work every single time. It's just that if she was responding by getting more upset or more anxious, that's not the time to push further. And I wanted to say one other thing that we didn't talk about because it really wasn't an issue for Jeannie, which is wandering. So that's something that's fairly common in the early to mid stage. The person, without knowing why, will have a desire to go, to walk out the door, sometimes just walk throughout the house, sometimes just creating a space where that's fine to walk. It's essential if a person has that wandering behavior that they have a safe place to move. Now, Jeannie, you could leave alone.
I was very comfortable doing that.
And she didn't go out.
She, in the 8 years that we lived at our house, not once even walked up to the mailbox. We lived in a very rural area. She was never much of a walker, and that was one thing I did not have to concern myself with.
So I do want to emphasize that that's somewhat unusual, that someone that you were as comfortable with that, you knew her well enough. Also, that she was safe in the house by herself.
She did not cook, so I didn't have to worry about her leaving the stove on. The only issue that I found was occasionally she would put something in the sink to rinse it out and leave the water running. But that was the worst environmental thing that happened. Everything else was pretty well under control, and I was...
That and the credit card.
Well, we got rid of that quite quickly. But I think the most important thing I have to share with you is the fact that it's so easy to feel like a victim by being the caregiver for someone. It's nothing that you sign up for. It's nothing that just one day you go from being the husband to becoming the caregiver. It's something that gradually creeps up on you. In my case, the depression became so great that it was affecting me very dramatically in many areas of my life. And I made a conscious decision that there have to be lessons in here. There has to be some way I can grow from this experience. What are the lessons? And that certainly empowered me to do all kinds of things that prior to that I never even considered. It was just too easy to react rather than to be active in taking care of my wife.
Well, somewhere around this time you figured out that you couldn't do it by yourself. So you tried support groups.
Yeah.
But also, how did you reach out for support with the care of this woman?
Well, Jeannie and I, this is when I became a social worker. This is about the only time it was helpful for me. I sat down with her one day and did a needs assessment. I said, okay, Jeannie, let's make a list of all the losses that you've experienced. And she had quite a list that she was able to come up with. And then on the other side of the paper, I said, now what kind of solutions can we come up with? And sometimes she could offer solutions, sometimes it was more up to me to offer the solutions. But lack of purpose was a huge thing for her. Just sitting home reading catalogs and playing with our dog was not sufficient enough. Being isolated, having no way to move around, just being stuck out of the house unless I was home. It was a substantial list of events. So what happened, it was a blessing truly, but I was at a health fair representing Cooley Dickinson's program that I was running. And a friend of mine who heads up the SHINE program, which is a volunteer group that tells people about different insurances that are available, said to me, are you aware of the frail elderly waiver? And I'd never heard this expression. It's a program that was administered through the Franklin County Home Care Corporation. And it was designed for elderly people who are low income, who could easily move into a nursing home, so as a way of supporting them independently to keep them out of nursing homes. They did require some assistance with their activities of daily living. So I applied for the program. She was financially eligible because it was based on her income, and all resources were in my name. A nurse and an occupational therapist came out to the home and did an assessment and determined, based on her needs, that she was eligible for 16 hours of a personal care assistant.